Mixed martial arts is a sport where some fighters thrive and many more get passed by. These fighters will compete for years at the highest level and put their bodies through the most brutal conditions. From extended training camps, grueling sparring sessions, tough injuries, and brutal weight cuts. Then there are the actual fights themselves, in which most fighters are paid paltry amounts of money, constantly worry about getting cut from the promotion, or worry about the UFC brass's lack of promotion and shady matchmaking. From a physical, mental, and financial standpoint, everything about fighting MMA revolves around pain. So when you are no longer able to compete at the highest level, retirement is often encouraged. It is tough to see fighters stay around longer than they should. When it happens, the brutal nature of the sport is made quite apparent. The truth is, retirement from MMA is tough. Most of these fighters are not financially set like athletes from the NBA, NFL, soccer, or the MLB. Therefore, you always see fighters trying to stretch out their careers as long as possible, even if they are suffering brutal losses. However, we rarely see the opposite in MMA, where fighters leave the sport rich at the top of their games in their primes with way more fights to give. When it does happen, fans are shocked. We ask, why would they want to retire? Maybe they are retiring too early. In this video, we will discuss 5 fighters who probably retired too early from MMA. Before we get into it, please remember to smash that like button if you like the video, as well as subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know whenever we have a new video coming out. Now back to our list. Khabib Nurmagomedov. This is the most recent and shocking example. Khabib is currently, maybe former by the time this video comes out, the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. He is 29-0 in mixed martial arts competition. Khabib owns dominant victories over former UFC champions Conor McGregor, Rafael dos Anjos, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje, as well as other notable challengers such as Edson Barboza, Al Iaquinta, and Michael Johnson. Khabib might be one of the most dominant champions and fighters MMA has ever seen. In his UFC career, Khabib has only lost 2 rounds out of 31 throughout his 13 wins. He has won 4 world title fights and defended his belt 3 times. His 3 consecutive title defenses are tied with Benson Henderson and BJ Penn for the most ever in the UFC lightweight division history. He is very respectful and showed class to every opponent he fought, not named Conor McGregor. Khabib was also a pay-per-view draw. His fights with Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje did 2.4 million buys, 1 million buys, and 700,000 buys respectively. Khabib was paid very well and was a cash cow for the UFC. However, after his fight with Justin Gaethje at UFC 254 last month, he shockingly announced his retirement from the sport of MMA. The world was shocked. However, it made more sense when we heard Khabib's reasoning. Khabib's father, mentor, and coach died a few months ago due to COVID-19 related symptoms. Khabib could not continue fighting without his father by his side. Whether he stays in retirement remains to be seen, but Khabib will join the list of a few fighters who leave the sport rich and at the top of their game. Maybe the fighter we talk about next will be the guy to bring Khabib out of retirement. Georges St-Pierre. Former UFC welterweight champion Georges St-Pierre was one of the promotion's most popular athletes in the late 2000s and early 2010s. He became a big pay-per-view draw after beating Matt Hughes in a rematch for the UFC welterweight title at UFC 65 in November of 2006. Although he was not always finishing fights, he was thoroughly dominating his opponents with his wide-ranging skill sets of wrestling, submission, and technical striking. GSP was a master of the basics. He would use this mastery to earn victories over big names like Josh Koscheck, John Fitch, Diego Alves, Jake Shields, BJ Penn, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, Dan Hardy, and Johnny Hendricks. GSP still holds the record for the most wins and title defenses in the UFC welterweight division. Shockingly, soon after his decision win over Johnny Hendricks at UFC 167 in November of 2013, St-Pierre announced his retirement from MMA. Most could not believe Georges St-Pierre would leave the sport in his prime given his competitive nature. But he did exactly that. His reasoning was that he could no longer handle the stress of being champion and needed to step away. Others think that it was because George had been dealing with several injuries, including a torn ACL in one knee and torn MCL in the other, both of which required surgery. George's movement was clearly not the same when he returned from injury. It was apparent in his last 3 UFC title fights. He was hit more in those 3 fights than his previous 8 fights combined. He was clearly taking more damage. Many think he left to preserve his body and mind. GSP vacated the belt and remained retired for the next 4 years. GSP would end up coming out of retirement to challenge and beat Michael Bisping for the UFC Middleweight Championship at UFC 216. St-Pierre defeated Bisping by 3rd-round submission to win the UFC Middleweight title. He would retire again a few weeks later as champion, thus cementing his legacy as one of the best MMA fighters of all time. Henry Cejudo. Next on our list is former UFC flyweight and bantamweight champion Henry Cejudo. Cejudo won the flyweight championship by defeating then #1 pound-for-pound fighter Demetrius Johnson in a decision in August of 2018. Cejudo would defend that flyweight title against then UFC bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw before going up a division to challenge Marlon Moraes for the UFC bantamweight title in June 2019. Cejudo would defeat Marlon by TKO in the 2nd round to win the bantamweight belt. Cejudo defended his title against former champion Dominick Cruz. Cejudo caught Dominick with a flying knee that put Cruz down. Cruz was badly hurt and the fight was waved off in the 2nd round with only 2 seconds to go. Another great performance by Cejudo. However, to the surprise of many, Cejudo would retire immediately after the contest in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. He said he was happy with what he had accomplished and wants to move on to the next phase of his life. In subsequent interviews weeks after the fight, he would later reveal that he simply felt underpaid for work he had put into winning and promoting his fights. In addition to not being respected by the company, he said if the UFC wants him to come back, they know the amount of money it would take. Henry officially vacated his belt and moved on. He has left the door open to coming back to MMA if the UFC can meet his financial demands and treats him with the proper respect. Anthony "Rumble" Johnson. Rumble is one of the best knockout artists MMA has ever witnessed. He has a God-given ability to put anyone's lights out with a single strike. During his 2 stints in the UFC, Anthony had always been a title contender or challenger. Overall, Johnson has 13 wins in the UFC. 11 of those 13 wins come by knockout, beating the likes of current Bellator MMA champion Ryan Bader, Glover Teixeira, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, Phil Davis, and Dan Hardy. Most of Johnson's losses have come to championships or top title contenders in their primes. In his final fight in the UFC, he challenged then light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier in a rematch for the title. Daniel had won the first fight by submission. Rumble was coming off 3 consecutive knockout victories and had won 12 of his last 13 fights. Johnson was a serious threat to defeat Cormier in a rematch. However, he would lose again by 2nd-round submission. He would announce his retirement after the fight. He cited that he simply did not have the drive to continue training like he used to. Many were dumbfounded given the miraculous streak Rumble had been on. In 2019, he decided to come out of retirement and recently re-entered the USADA testing pool, with plans of a comeback to the 205-pound division. However, we will see if he sets foot in the octagon again. Ronda Rousey. This one might be a little more controversial. We all know Ronda Rousey. She is a pioneer for women's MMA, won the Strikeforce women's bantamweight belt and defended it twice. She was the inaugural UFC women's bantamweight champion and defended her belt 6 times. In this streak, she won all her fights by armbar or knockout. She holds victories over Miesha Tate, Sarah Kaufman, Sarah McMahon, Kat Zingano, Bet Koihea, Liz Carmouche, Julia Budd, and Alexis Davis. Ronda rose to prominence and became a household name. She sold a ton of pay-per-views and made a lot of money. From 2014 to 2015, Ronda was the UFC's highest-paid fighter according to Dana White. This all came crashing down with 2 crushing knockout losses to former champion Holly Holm and current champion Amanda Nunes. Ronda simply had a deficiency in the striking game that was heavily exploited in both losses. Many believe this was due to her inferior coaching. Some think if she had a real camp with superior coaching for an extended period of time, then these striking issues would have been corrected and improved. However, Ronda chose to retire from MMA at the height of her popularity and take her talents to the WWE. Honestly, this was probably a good move on her part because the WWE paid her a lot of money and professional wrestling is not nearly as violent as MMA. Okay guys, what did you think of this list? Is there anyone you think I left off this list? Let me know in the comments. Please remember to smash the like button if you enjoyed the video. It helps me out a ton. Also, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get informed every time we drop a new video. I appreciate you guys watching until the end, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.